Welcome to Get Rich Without Being a Bitch. This is the place to hear real and raw conversations about what it takes for female entrepreneurs to achieve financial success and live a rich life. I'm Vanessa Shaw, author of The $1 Million Question, and your hostess for this podcast. Yay, Jen Coken. Oh my gosh, welcome.
Oh my gosh.
Get Rich Without Being a Bitch podcast. I am so excited about the conversation we're about to have. It was getting pretty exciting before we even turned this on, and we were chatting about lots and lots of different tangents that we could be going in our conversation today. But by way of introduction, so that our audience knows, I just want to let them have like the really high level on you, and then we're going to dive into really, really fantastic content. You are a peak performance coach, speaker, author, and expert on the subject of imposter syndrome. And you primarily work with C-suite women, executive women, helping them navigate this whole kind of quagmire of imposter syndrome. So let's just dive in right there. And what is it, Jen? Well, I've heard this term. I know I've suffered with it. A lot of the women I work with. What is imposter syndrome and why is it important?
So it was identified by two psychologists back in the 70s, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. And what they found is people who were in very high achieving positions, very high level positions, felt like a fraud. They didn't think their skills had gotten them there. They actually thought they got there by luck. And what's so interesting for me is that people like Maya Angelou, you know, when she was writing her 12th book, she thought someone was going to be knocking at the door saying, no, we were kidding. We don't want you to write any more books. Albert Einstein thought of himself as an involuntary swindler. So the term, right? So the term syndrome is imposter syndrome. It's really imposter phenomenon or sensation, but because the syndrome is a medical diagnosis, this isn't a medical diagnosis. Once Clance and Imes discovered this in the 70s, they also thought their theory was women experienced it far more than men because men have more testosterone, which is thought of as the confidence hormone. But that's actually not the case. We just talk about it. We talk about our feelings a whole lot more.
You know, I've just learned something right in that minute. I just absolutely always assumed that women suffered with this far more than men.
Nope. There's no studies. There's no research and they estimate that 70% of all people suffer from it. I, having been a coach for so long and coached people from high school students to members of Congress, everybody I come across has some form of imposter syndrome, of questioning and doubting themselves. And I say, if you don't have some form of it, you're not stretching yourself enough. You're not risking yourself enough. Now, the other piece I'll say, which is, you know, questioning and doubting, thinking we're a fraud. I never thought about that. I never thought that I was a fraud. Did I question myself? Sure, but I didn't know I was doing it. In the 2000s, Dr. Valerie Young looked at all the research from Clance and Imes and the subsequent research, and she came up with these subcategories that for me opened up an entire world. So there's these 5 subcategories. There's people who are perfectionists. Well, hello, that's me. People who need to go it alone, people who feel like they're an expert, they have to get all these degrees after their name, people who are superwoman, staying at the office late, you know, getting there earlier. Hello, that was me. I worked in politics forever and I had to be the first one in and the last one to leave. And then the other one that really rang a true bell for me was this subcategory she called her archetype, natural genius, the people who things come easily to. And that's always been me. And I figured out this week, Vanessa, because I was preparing for something and I kept procrastinating and procrastinating. I had weeks to do it. And I was like 11th hour doing it. Like, dang, I get it. As a natural genius, things come easy to me. If they're not coming easy, or I don't see the easy path between A and B, I procrastinate.
So interesting.
Right?
So interesting. So let's just back up a minute here, because I'm like, and I'm really thinking about this through my own story, right now.
Of course.
When I went into business for myself, and I don't know how much you know of my backstory, but some of my listeners certainly know my backstory. I was stay-at-home mom turned entrepreneur. So I actually stayed at home supporting my husband in his global career for, close to 10 years. I had my kids, ran the home really beautifully. That was my role. I did it extremely well and kind of saw that as my career. And then I retrained as a kind of life coach back then, although I actually barely practiced as a life coach, because like yourself, I actually went straight into the world of like peak performance coaching in the side of corporations and executive development. And that there was I kind of, again, true story. I was hired before there was even any ink on my coaching certification, right? So in terms of like, I wasn't really that one that was like thinking I needed to have like, the certification and all the rest of it to get going. I saw an opportunity, jumped in, landed myself a 6-figure deal, before I was even qualified as a coach, and figured, I'll figure it out. This is an opportunity. And then imposter syndrome flared up massively for me, Jen. I mean, absolutely massively. And I would actually even call myself back then like the queen of self-doubt, right? I mean, I literally was wearing like that crown, the queen of self-doubt. And my thing was just, I don't know what really, I mean, and you're very welcome to help me unpack it, even looking back on it now. So it's kind of a fun story. I really felt like the fraud police. It wasn't even one person. For me, it was like the whole police force, fraud police, was going to come knocking at my door and basically say, what the heck do you think you're up to? You have no right doing what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. You are winging it, Vanessa Shaw, right? And frankly, you're a stay-at-home mom. You are good at making cupcakes. You're wonderful at running the home. You're a great cook. You're great with your kids. And they are going to come and discover that that's who you really are. And you have no place coaching, right, these top executives that are running really successful businesses. And, frankly, you're going to be locked up for this. I mean, that was kind of the story that ran in my head for, I would say, a good 18 months.
It's not unusual, but number one, right? Gosh, so great. It's very similar to my own, but let me say a couple of things about that. One is your story is a story. What we see in our mind, what we think about, what we're making up, the self-doubts, all that kind of stuff is not even real. It's just stuff we're making up. What are they going to do? The first of all, the fraud police, which doesn't exist, are going to come in and go, you are only allowed to make birthday cakes on Fridays for this group. Get your hands off everybody, on coaching them. Who do you think you are? The other piece of that, though, is the more you risked, the more your self-doubt crept up. And our self-doubts are questioning ourselves. We all come by it very honestly. And if you go to Google and look up overcoming imposter syndrome, the other day I looked it up, 1.14 million hits on Google.
Wow.
Tools, tips, and techniques. None of those work because you can't manage your mind. You're not going to be able to manage out of your self-doubt in your mind. We have somewhere around the average of 50 to 60,000 thoughts a day, and upwards of 85% are negative.
Yes.
So it's the way the human mind works because it's designed to determine threat and keep us alive and safe. So on one hand, imposter syndrome is a way to give you an avenue into what the mind games are and the chatter in your head is telling you. And each of us has a little bit of a flavor. So if I was coaching you, one of the things I would say to you would be, Vanessa, do you remember a time when you were a child that you wanted to embark on something new, some big journey, and were either told no by your parents or you epically failed? You have any memory of that?
It's interesting. Gosh. It's interesting because there's nothing that massively springs to mind.
Right. And that's the key thing. So when I work with clients, I'm getting them back to that originating story. It doesn't have to be some dramatic or traumatic incident. And I mean, I'm putting you on the spot. Usually
Yeah.
what I do is I take people through a guided meditation so they can also feel where that imposter syndrome shows up in their body, because sometimes we can't get back to a memory. We
Mm.
just notice we start caving into ourselves. It's almost like protection mode.
Mm.
And you could use that as a clue that you're dealing with imposter syndrome. Be like, okay, deep breath, shoulders back. I'm going to show up as powerful. Now, what I do isn't positive vibes or mantras, because again, that stuff doesn't work. We really get to the source of something and unlock the brain pattern where you put it together. So for example, I had a client who, when she was 9, she was a straight A student. I was like, okay, 9, you're in 4th grade. Gotcha. She came home with a C in math. Long division, she couldn't get, who knows. And she showed all A's, the 1 C. First time she shows the report card to her father, who's in the military. She was a military brat and traveled all around living on military bases as a child. And her dad was very stern and said, what's up with the C? Well, Dad, it's average. Give me 1,500 words on average. And
Oh my Lord.
Right, like that moment, and he probably didn't even say it that way. That's the way, as a 55-year-old woman, she heard it. And in that moment, what she realized is she was like, I'm never going to get it wrong again. I'm going to have to get it right, because I don't want to feel that embarrassment and that shame. And then we telescoped out to her current life, where that perfectionism has propelled her to the C-suite. So our imposter syndrome can be our superpower. Used for good and not for evil. And the evil is definitely directed toward us.
Yeah, you've got me thinking about this now, because and again, it is interesting, because I'm not sure that there was necessarily that one particular incident, but I think there was probably a flavor of like little stories, right, that were going on. And I certainly had a story. Well, it wasn't a story, it was an experience of when I would declare what I wanted growing up, kind of, really, I was definitely passionate. I was aware of my desires. I was very aware of my emotions. It was that sense of being shut down, right? So that I definitely remember, and it's something I've had to do work around, like sort of like, no, Vanessa, that's not right, or it's not right to feel that way, or be careful about, really wanting to go for things, because you'll set yourself up for disappointment. That was definitely a story. And so I think for me, as you're saying this, and I think back to that experience, I almost feel like it was that playing out at a different level, right? Once I got that contract, it was like, well, you've gone for what you've wanted. You said you wanted, right? You wanted to train as a coach. You were transitioning out of the stay-at-home mom, being a coach, setting up my own business. I was very excited about that. I was very passionate about the work, still am today. And then it was almost almost as if it was tinged with disappointment, that be careful, it's all gonna, I think it's there, it's like, literally, this is so helpful to say it out loud, because
Yes,
it was almost that, be careful, it's all gonna come crumbling down. And the version of it coming crumbling down was, well, frankly, they're going to discover that you're not good enough, right? And that you should be baking cupcakes at home and actually not coaching the C-suite and all these top executives.
right. Now, let me ask you something. I love that you got to this. So this whole notion of being careful, if you just breathe for a minute into your body, where do you feel that? Be careful.
And I am very aware of it right now. It's kind of in my solar plexus.
Perfect. You know why? Because your solar plexus, that chakra, is your personal seat of power. Be careful. Careful. Always in the background, be careful. Now, what I would say to you, if we were working together, I'd say, okay, Vanessa, over the next week, notice when you either have that feeling in your solar plexus, or you notice you're saying to yourself, be careful, or you notice yourself not giving all of you, you're giving 99% of you, so that you can begin to witness when that gets triggered, and then begin to discover and dissect, well, what's triggering it? Is it a person of authority says X? Is it putting that blog post out that you've been wanting to write, that's way more vulnerable than the ones that you've been doing to everybody? Is, you're in a meeting and you speak up. Now now nobody's in meetings, but you speak up and nobody pays attention. Then a guy says what you just said, and everyone's like, oh my God, he's amazing. He's brilliant.
Yes. Yes.
Well, be careful. Don't speak up anymore. So I'd have you unpack that. And then we look at, well, how do you want, if you were done being careful, because look, being careful is your superpower. Look where you are today.
Mm.
Look at what you've accomplished today. Look at the lives you've transformed, all inside of undistinguished being careful.
Mm. Yeah.
And when you take that away, if you weren't busy being careful, consciously or unconsciously, how do you want to show up that maybe you've never even thought about before, or never let yourself show up as a leader, as a coach?
So good. So a couple of things that are coming out, because I personally, I was fascinated, which is one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you today for our podcast listeners, because the truth is I ended up doing a lot of work around this for myself, right? Back then. And we're talking, we're talking, gosh, 15, 16 years ago. And there was something that you said earlier, which I think is, about turning it into a superpower. Because the reality is I had enough kind of insight to know that it wasn't all bad. Now, it was very present. I'm not for 1 minute saying it was not. I mean, this kind of my imposter, I ended up drawing my imposter. He was like a little cartoon character. He was called Freddy the Fraud. I gave him a name. He actually looked like a little, the Mario Kart, like
Yeah.
the kids, my son would play with whatever it was, the Nintendo Mario. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Freddy the Fraud looks just like Mario with like a big moustache. And it was almost as if he was like an ankle biter. And he was like this tiny, tiny little being that would creep up, as you say, at trigger moments, right? And back then, a lot of my trigger moments were powerful, very confident, borderline arrogant, let's say, male executives. So here, right, it was like, now I'm in that, the container where I've got to work through these things. And for me, part of the, as you say, the be careful, which was the good side of it, it was like, that's some wisdom that's actually coming to me, right? It's like, be careful, let's listen to this. And at the time, the reality was, Jen, I actually wasn't, it definitely a natural gift for me, coaching, right? And I own it as a natural gift today. Back then, I was in the questioning. So as you said about like the natural gift and the procrastination and everything, it's like, wow, that rings true. But I was also using that to skill up. It was the be careful. I was learning more, but learning more in a very strategic way. So I was actually doing a lot of research, right, into core subjects. I was learning about strategy. I was learning about peak performance. It got me into the world of leading teams and like really good things through that be careful.
Yeah.
So that was, the kind of wisdom of it. And certainly, again, now with the, oh my gosh, like it's so wonderful when you've got like 16 years, right, to fast forward and look back on these things. When you say, what's that version of me that now shows up? She's just so much bolder. I mean, so that the care is kind of there at the center of it, but, I'll cut through stuff now so much quicker and dare to say things and frankly, not particularly be bothered by, not the consequences, not that I sort of, want to become rude or anything like that. But again, it's just showing up in such a different way. And I love that you said, and I'd love for you to expand upon that, in your work, using imposter syndrome as a superpower. Because I did do a lot of work. Had I had you in my corner back then to say, like, we're using this as a superpower, oh my gosh, that would have shaved off a lot of time and a lot of suffering.
Absolutely. Well, what I hear when you're speaking about how you're showing up now, I hear bold, authentic, and caring. Right? That is who you are. You are bold, authentic, and caring. Absolutely. Without a doubt. Anybody listening to this podcast, anybody who's ever interacted with you, anybody who's watched you on anything, bold, authentic, and caring. You'd have to put it into your own words. But with my client, so how imposter syndrome played out with her perfectionism is she, not only did she want to be perfect for fear of being embarrassed, everybody else had to be perfect too. Now she was a COO and a CFO. And so this perfectionism, when you're coming in numbers on a company, when you're looking at ROI, you want to be a perfectionist because the numbers don't lie. If
Yeah.
you get wrong on what your KPIs are, what the ROI is, you could wind up nixing some segment of the company that actually is making the company a lot of money, but you didn't put enough care into looking at the numbers. So here she is, the COO of a big trade association, 55 years old, but an upset 9-year-old is running the company.
Mm.
And so what she could also see was that perfectionist tendency she expected out of everybody else, including people who reported to her. They could never do anything right. And she loved her job. She'd been there 26 years. She had her boss for 15 years. The two of them used to get along like peanut butter and jelly, and she couldn't stand them. She used to love her job. She hated going there every day and was ready to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of that perfectionism is she took everything personally. If things weren't perfect, she took it and internalized it as personal to her. And so when we identified, and this was in one session, we identified that brain pattern and unlocked it. And she could see the whole world of trying to get everything right. And then she goes out to observe. And in the second session, we identify those triggers. We had a conversation about, well, what would that look like if you weren't a perfectionist, if you weren't taking things personally? And she said, she said, I want to be caring. I want to be empathetic, but I can see something else that would really serve me is just being curious. Instead of taking it personally, I could say, and this is the practice that we put together, I'm curious. How come you didn't finish that report? I thought after we met, I asked you if you had questions. You said you didn't, and you understood it. I'm just curious. What do you think went wrong? Rather than why didn't you do this? You're making more work for me, et cetera. And that is a practice she puts into today. So as I was working with her, we would look at places she could practice. I'm curious. We would role play conversations. Well, she is now ecstatic in her job, the same job. She's fallen back in love with it. She's fallen back in love with her people. And oddly enough, her boss went off to another association. And we really looked at whether she wanted to apply for the CEO position. And in her heart of hearts, she didn't. She liked being, and we looked again to see if imposter syndrome was fitting in there. But what truly spoke to her in her soul was being in that COO, CFO role. And so that's how we turned it into her superpower. She became curious. She was empathetic. Yeah. And what I always teach people, if you assume this is a line, everything below the line is imposter syndrome and reaction. And everything above the line is up for creation. So the moment we observe that, be careful, wait a minute. Okay, am I choosing powerfully to be careful and study everything and really gather that information? Or am I still in reaction mode and am reducing the risk and stepping back? Can I be bold, authentic, and caring right now? Can I be curious, caring, and empathetic right now? So and it's really about practicing, practice. When I work with people in imposter syndrome, what we're doing and what we did with you is really unlock a new neural pathway.
Yes.
Because that old habit is so ingrained. So now we want you to practice. And that's part of the visualization technique because it creates a stickiness and that neural pathway. And the practices create habits that allow that just to become natural to who you are. So for you, the work you did is just part of who you are, is bold, authentic, beautiful. I'm going to put that in, and caring. That's just who you are. You're welcome.
Thank you. No, and again, it's so good. I mean, again, such a great conversation. This is something that honestly should be taught. I mean, so much earlier on. As I say, yes, I was able to work through that level of it. There was a lot of anguish at the time, a lot of discomfort, and of course, you figure things out. But I feel like, wow, why aren't we taught this stuff in school, Jen? I mean, we should be like so much earlier on, and especially, right, as you say, this is something that affects people that are achieving, right? Because again, it's back to, if we're not striving to get outside of our comfort zone and go for those stretch goals, well, imposter syndrome's not likely to show up, right? That's again, and it's one place of keeping it all in its corner, but you start to stretch and be bolder, and then it starts to show up.
Yeah, absolutely. I always joke and say, I joke about this. It's not really real, but left up to my own devices, I would lie on the couch watching romantic comedies in my fuzzy slippers, eating chocolate covered cherries or eating some kind of chocolate and drinking a good Chardonnay. Imposter syndrome is not going to find me if that's all I'm doing with my life.
Right. That sounds quite good though, by the way.
It does, right?
once in a while, that'd be good. So I am curious. I'm going to turn the tables on you now, because
Yeah.
I'm very curious. How was imposter syndrome showing up for you?
Oh my God. This is how I got into this is how I became an expert. So I was a coach for an international personal growth and development company for 16 years. And at the same time, I was in politics and working on getting other people elected and passing legislation, yada, yada, yada. Around 2016, when I went into business for myself and wanted to be a coach, and I was no longer coaching for this company, I saw what other people were doing, and none of it seemed to make sense to me in terms of how they were coaching people. Like everyone's like, "Hey, I can tell you how to get, high ticket paying people, and you should do Facebook ads." I'm like, that is nonsense. So as I was trying to figure out my own lane of how I wanted to coach people, the other piece that was there for me was I was no longer representing this well-known company.
Mm,
What do I have to say? Is what I'm saying going to make a difference? How do I think about something? Is anyone going to listen? And I spent a lot of years throwing spaghetti on the wall and trying to figure
mhm.
stuff out and doubting myself. And around 2000, like 3 years, around 2019 is when I realized, oh, it's imposter syndrome. Well, I know what it was. 2019, I said, I'm going to take on, all right, I know what I have to say. I'm going to be a tall poppy. I'm going to stick my neck out. I'm going to be heard. And my head got lopped off time and again. I took
Yeah.
on a big corporate client and got sucked into a toxic environment and spent the year like in bed. I mean, I was out working, I was traveling every month, but when I was home, I was huddled under the covers, crying, annoyed, really unhappy. Finally, 2020 comes along of all times. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, let me sort this out with one of my coaches. And I realized I was 6 years old. I liked the same boy as my best friend, Michelle. We liked Keith. And we decided at 6, what we ought to do in Michigan in the winter is chase him around the playground in the snow and push him down on the snowbank and see who he liked by puckering up and see who he would kiss.
Oh
And
my
he,
gosh. I know where we're going with this. I know exactly. You didn't get kissed.
I didn't get kissed. He kissed Michelle and not me. And I looked at Michelle, who was this tiny little pipsqueak of a blonde haired, blue eyed thing with a pert nose. And I'm 5'10" with black hair and black eyes and, big nose Jewish kid, twice the size of everyone else. And I didn't get kissed. I didn't get kissed. And right then I said, okay, well, I'll just be the funny sidekick.
Mm,
And my whole career was spent helping other people go after their dreams, to the
mm,
point where I didn't know what my own were, to the
yeah.
point where I didn't know what my voice was. And in the moment of unlocking that, the whole world opened up to me. And then I began researching imposter syndrome and recognizing it for what it was, and then designed the quiz that I do and the talks that I do. Because the more I get into it, the more it's there. It's never going away. It's simply, am I going to buy into the imposter syndrome, or am I going to show up as playful, irreverent, joyful, and loving, which is the person that I am? But yeah, I was a mess for a
Yeah.
year, a good year.
And I think again, thanks for sharing your story, because I think again, it's how it gets us in the grip of it, right? And a lot of this stuff has happened, as you say, very early on. And as you say, I did an episode recently, which was, I get into that with you in a minute, but it was all about financial, my financial story and my money story. But really and truly, like my kid, my inner 5-year-old was running the show, and how we have those earlier experiences that we think are somewhat benign. It's like, whoa, what was the big deal? But yet here we are decades later. I mean, really decades later, as you say, and it's always at that point of stretch, which is why this is an important conversation. So your comfort zone was actually, having a high flying job and career with the other company, but the stretch is when you start to go out on your own, right? And that's something I hear from women a lot. Once they're
Absolutely.
starting to establish their own brand, that's often where those voices, kind of creep in. And we find that there was this thing, as you say, from decades ago, that is running the show still.
Exactly. I'll tell you another, because it's always some innocuous little thing, but our minds make up stories. I had a client who was also a CFO for a big company. And when she was about 12, she and some friends were walking to get ice cream after school. And two of the girls didn't have money and she offered to pay. And one of the girls said, well, there she goes again, helping everybody out. And right then she decided, I'm never going to offer help. I'm never going to ask for help. So
Mm,
everything she had to do herself. She couldn't delegate to her team. People should just know already, you should know what I need, but everything was about her doing it alone.
yes.
Ice cream. And I said, what happened? She goes, I walked to the store and got ice cream. I go, uh-huh. And that little 12-year-old's running your company and managing multi-million dollars of financials. Yay.
Yay. Exactly. Oh my gosh, so good. So tell me, I do want to bridge this into as well. I'm curious even about your own money story, because a lot of what we share on this podcast is that, again, our own money stories, not the own breakthroughs that we have to have in terms of taking, really, taking our business to the next level. And I'm curious, because I'd asked you this question of, how do you see, like, what is the link between imposter syndrome and actually generating more money in your business? What are you seeing around that?
Three things around that jump out at me. And I loved that question. I told you that because I had never thought to connect those dots. And even as you were talking, I can now see more dots connected to my version of imposter syndrome and my money story. But number one, women don't ask when they're being an imposter. We don't ask for what we're worth.
Mm,
We don't ask for the raises. We don't ask for the big clients. We don't ask for a big paycheck because we devalue our worth. Well, they're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing, right?
yes. Yes.
Another one is, we don't go for the higher paying job. If you're not an entrepreneur and you're in a company, most women, if our resume doesn't match all 12 of the skills they're looking for, we won't go after that job. A guy comes along, he'll be like, oh yeah, I'm breathing. I'm going to apply for that job.
Yeah,
What's the
I've got
big
6 of
deal?
the 12.
Yeah. Or I've got 2 of the 12, whatever it was. And then the third way is that you get passed up for promotions. You get passed up for big contracts because you don't like talking about yourself. You're not promoting yourself. And I'm not saying to promote yourself in an arrogant way, but you discount the work you do and you don't own your own genius. You don't embrace your success. You don't own your genius and express that to other people. So that would be the 3 ways. Passed up for the promotions, don't go for the big jobs, and don't go after more money or a
And
higher
honestly,
ticket.
I could draw a parallel, because obviously you work more inside of organizations, right? C-suite and executives. Mine are female entrepreneurs, right? Typically, again, wanting to grow and scale their business. But in fact, I can see exactly the same, because now here they are outside of corporate, right? And they're doing their own thing. And again, pricing can be all over the place, undercharging and over delivering, something
Yes,
that we see an awful lot of.
absolutely.
Again, discounting even their services, kind of offering those deals. Another area that I see a lot is, again, part of the work that we do is kind of similar to the promotion. It's like they don't give themselves a promotion with their ideal clients. So working with clients that honestly are too easy. And it's almost like I liken it to, they could almost have like a PhD level of skill set that they could be operating at. Yet here they are matching themselves with, let's say, elementary school, right? So, and often that feeds the beast, that imposter syndrome of undervaluing themselves and their expertise, because at the end of the day, there's a mismatch, right, on the skill level and the audience that they're actually operating with. The other place that I see it really plays out a lot in the female businesses is not paying themselves the salary that they want from their own business. So,
Yeah.
a lot of other people will be paid first in the company. Other people may be paid more than them. And again, it could be the kind of a small amount that's left over, or kind of what's left over, and I'll make do. So those are some of the places that we really see it critically playing out, again, with money inside of a small business. So it keeps it's the same, it just looks somewhat different, but it's the same stuff.
Yeah, I love what you're saying for a couple of reasons. One is one of my clients is actually one of those very people who was paying everybody else. And then she didn't take her bonus because I just shouldn't do that. I'm the owner, and I'm working with her
Mm.
on that. And then I also remember being part of a roundtable of 8-figure business owners and just listening to them to gain as much knowledge as I could. And one of the things they said was how we're not doing anything different than we did when we were 6 figures or 7 figures. We just charge more.
Mm.
But that has to be what you work with people on, has to be a shift in mindset to relax, to receive, to allow for the reception, the receptivity of not what you're owed, but what you're worth.
Yeah, and what your services are truly worth as well, right? That's one of the things I always try to work with, untangling. Let's not get this so tied up in self-worth, because at the end of the day, it's infinite what we are worth, right? But if
Yes.
we can really start to look at what the services are really worth, and especially when we translate those into the results that we get for our clients and the knock-on effect, we start to see, oh, yes, you're quite right, Vanessa. I'm seriously undercharging.
Yes.
A quick I've got another question I want to ask you, and then we're going to get into a couple of rapid fire just to kind of end this. I could go on forever today, Jen. It's such a really juicy, important conversation. Your own money story growing up. Oh, let's go there.
Okay, easy. It was scarce. That was my perception. It was scarce. So definitely middle class. And I have a couple of very specific memories because my parents divorced when I was young. My mom was a school teacher, couldn't keep raising us in the house on her salary, and went to work for the government. But there was a moment sitting at the kitchen table, dining room table. She was very quiet. I was eating dinner. My brother had left. What's going on? And she just burst into tears. She goes, I don't know how we're going to pay the lights. I don't know how we're going to pay all this stuff. I guess I have to put it on a credit card. And I looked at her and said, I'm the kid. I mean, I'm the one who asked, but I'm the kid. Why are you unburdening yourself on me? You
Mm.
know? So my mother was very good at saving, very good at being frugal, which resulted in her being able to take us all on family vacations. And when she retired, she had a good amount of savings to be able to retire on. Now you would think that would have passed to me, but no, how I related to that was if I got it, I spend it.
It's
Because
very
I want to
similar.
spend on what I want when I want it.
Yes.
And so now, as the owner of a company, I have to look at, okay, what's going into retirement? What's going into the, savings to be able to pay my taxes? What do I have in liquid? What are all my investments? How am I planning 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out for growth? And
Mm.
what resources do I need to get there? Which is a very different mindset. And I also shared with you, there was one of the questions, well, you'll probably ask it, so I'll wait. But yeah, I've had to shift my mindset continuously around
And
this.
you also shared something around, the perception of rich people growing up. That's the one. It's like, what was that about?
They are mean and they are grifters. And how come they did not come by their money honestly? When my family moved from Michigan to Ohio, Michigan, it was Kalamazoo. My brother, I was a tomboy, wore tough skins jeans, which are like double-sided knees so that I could stop ripping my jeans because I would fall
Right.
so much. And then we moved from this very, middle-class neighborhood to my dad got a promotion. We moved to this upper middle-class neighborhood. And I'm Jewish. When I lived in Kalamazoo, my brother and I were the only 2 Jews in the school. And we moved to this upper middle-class Jewish neighborhood. And the thing that struck me was none of the kids played outside. None of them played on their bikes. None of them played with each other. It was when the first video games came out. And what they were judged by was, do you have your Jordache jeans on? Which I had tough skins on.
Yes.
Your video games. And my parents were not ones to lavish us with a lot of gifts. You had to, you got an allowance and you did chores. So I'm like, all right. And they were all mean girls. So, these mean girls, Debbie and Avon, was really where this whole mindset came into, that they're just mean.
You'll
Rich people
remember
are
their
mean.
names. We always remember their names, don't we?
Can I tell you something? Both of those women have passed away. And I dealt with like 5 years ago, still being mad at them, and realized I was mad at dead people.
Crazy. Yes.
So crazy.
I know, it's so crazy. But again, even as you said that, I can think of, there was one, I won't say the name actually on the podcast, but again, my nemesis as well. That was that kind of one person in my side growing up. But isn't it interesting how
Yep.
oftentimes there is this story, and certainly that was part of my backstory as well around money, was it was something mysterious, right? And that they came across money by some kind of shady means. And for me, that really meant, if I wanted more money, then I wasn't going to be a good person. And that was something that I've had to do a lot of work over the years. And again, helping our clients with that, it's that you don't, being rich doesn't mean to, again, the story of this podcast, right? You can be rich. You don't have to be a bitch, especially in business, to
Right.
really get ahead. But a couple of just quick fire questions to end this amazing conversation. I'm curious, what does being rich today mean for you?
Oh, it's rich in time, rich in friends, rich in love. And it's interesting for me how I define that is, do I have the ability? I mean, without COVID, I want to get a big house in August where my friends can all come and we can hang out for the month and I'm not working. Right.
Mm,
So for me, it's not the material things, because even at this stage of my career, I don't need a fancy house or a fancy car. I want to travel the world. That's what it means to me, is being able to have those relationships and those connections and rich in experiences. I think
mm.
that's what it really is rich in experiences. And you know what? You need money to do all that.
But you do. Exactly. Exactly. It might not be the materialistic, as you say, fancy car, shoes, bling, whatever it is. But again, those things, they still need some sort of funding.
And I want to fly first class when I fly around the world. So you definitely need some money for that.
Yes, I haven't been on a plane now for almost a year. I think we're coming up for a year. And I have
Me
to say,
too.
the thought of as well being in a cramped capsule going over the ocean is definitely, I'm, wanting to raise my personal standards around that as well. So I'm totally with you on that one. Best $100 you've spent recently, or invested, if you like, and what is it?
Well, my stepmom just had foot surgery, and I called the florist that she adores, that's local in her town. She is head of the beautification committee in her town. So she loves flowers, she loves gardening. And I called that store and told them who the flower arrangement was for. And they delivered her this gorgeous flower arrangement that she couldn't, in her drugged up haze, because she's on pain meds, that she couldn't stop talking about.
Oh, I love that. So you really paid it forwards and somebody else was just enjoying that as well. And I love, as you can see here in the background, one of my gifts to myself is fresh flowers every single week. And I love gifting fresh flowers as
Yes,
well.
I know you do.
So, Jen, if people want to find out more about how to connect with you and your amazing work, what's the best way that they can do that?
Well, for me, just go to my website, jencoken.com, JenCoken.com. And for imposter syndrome, the best thing to do is to take my quiz, jencokenquiz.com, which will give you a flavor of it. It'll give you some resources, some tools, and a link to my Facebook group, Making Imposter Syndrome Your Superpower.
I love that. Thank you so much, as always, for your generosity. I know our listeners today are going to be really loving this, uncovering their own imposter syndrome stories. And my message to you as well is, if you are not experiencing imposter syndrome, then you are probably not stretching enough and not playing bigger and bolder as you really could be. So, Jen, always a delight, my friend. Are you going to go and get some chocolate covered cherries and a glass of Chardonnay and some comfy clothes and go and hit the couch now?
At some point, I got to take the little four-legged beasts to the vet and wrestle them into their carrier cages. So as soon as I'm done with that, yes, I'm going to cook myself a nice meal. I already have it planned out in my head with my new air fryer. So
there we go. Well, enjoy. And thank you as always. It's just
thank you so much.